Here's why you should probably wait for the PS5 Pro. Should Sony call it quits on VR? And you won't need an SSD upgrade for this new game. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to PSReady. This is the early week update here on the channel. I'm back in Michigan and ready to deliver you the best PS5 news that happened over the weekend. If that sounds good to you, let me know by subscribing and setting your notifications to all. All right, so if you didn't catch the short video I put up on Friday, it was basically just a rundown of this leaked PS5 Slim that is out in the wild now. Someone in China actually has like the plastic chassis of this device, which basically lets us know that yeah, this thing is coming this year. And like all of the rumors from Tom Henderson and Insider Gaming have said, it's not really going to look all that different from the current PS5. After getting to see a full look at this thing through some other leaked videos from someone who just has it and he's flipping it around, this thing, in my opinion at least, looks like a visual downgrade from the current PS5. If you put these things right next to each other, they're not exactly identical, but they're really the same makeup of the console, except because this thing is going to have a detachable disk drive, the disk drive slot on the side plate that covers up that side of the console sticks out quite a bit farther, it looks like, than it does currently on the PS5, and it also looks like it has a much more like pronounced bump than what we have on the PS5. And also the middle doesn't really look like it's got that flat edge on top of it, it's kind of sloped in, but that's really the only difference outside of the left side plate, you know, the one that can't have a disk drive on it, having a black line splitting it down the middle. So I'm really curious if the current plates will actually work on this PS5, specifically the digital version. Like, I know that the current plates won't work on the disc version that has the disk drive attached because it looks like that's going to stick out pretty far from the console. But you know, if you get the digital one or the disk driveless one, like the core model of the new PS5, it kind of seems like you might be able to just use the older plates. I'm putting quotes around olders because this console is like 2 years old. Reactions to this thing have been pretty mixed across the board. I would say they're tilting negative, and I completely understand why. There's really no reason for this console specifically to come out right now. It's a revision on the original PS5 that's making it easier for Sony to just have one production line where they can make a bunch of digital consoles and then have someone at the end of the line take about half of them and attach a disk drive to it, and then the other half is going to just come with an extra plate, I would assume, in case you upgrade to a disk drive later. So overall, it's a cost-cutting measure for Sony. There's really no reason for this thing to exist outside of that. The other reason I think the reaction is skewing negative on this is because it's not a slim model at all. While yes, they did, it seems like, at least a little bit reduce the size of that middle portion of the console, it looks like they've made up for that reduction by making the disk drive stick out pretty far on the disk drive side of the device. So while yeah, if you have a digital model, it might be just a little slimmer than the current one we already have, but overall this is once again near identical to what we already have sitting on our entertainment centers right now. And then the third reason that I think people are largely going to ignore this thing unless they're in the market for a brand new PS5 is because the PS5 Pro is coming out next year, right? Like, Tom Henderson is the person who leaked this console. He told us exactly what it was going to look like, and this dude was 100% spot on with all of his leaks. He's also the person who's leaking the PS5 Pro, and he's saying that by the end of the year, developers will have PS5 Pro development units in their studios, and that it's really targeting next fall as a release date. So if you take this new console that looks pretty much identical to the one we already have and combine it with the fact that a massively upgraded version of that console is going to be coming out next year, and it's probably not only going to look different, but I would guess look a little bit better than the current PS5, it's kind of like all molding together into this big ball of disappointment in this PS5 Slim. Because, you know, outside of the fact that Sony really wants to cheapen the cost of making this thing, there's just not really any reason for it to exist. One massive fallout that I could see coming out of this, though, is maybe the launch unit PS5 becoming even more coveted than it already is. I think they're going for like 6 or 7 grand now because they come along with firmware that makes them hackable. So yeah, the price is already driven up there, but I think at least this launch model of the PS5 looks better than the PS5 we're getting at the end of the year. So, you know, you can kind of see the price going up even farther for not just the launch model, but every model leading up to this new version of the PlayStation 5. I'm just personally very curious what the overall reaction to this thing is going to be when it's officially announced, because, you know, the hardcore gamers like us, we have kind of seen it at this point, but I would argue that the people who really matter for this, you know, the people people who haven't been really all that tempted by a PlayStation 5 just yet, their opinion kind of matters the most on this because that's the mass market. That's the huge group of people that Sony really wants to go out and spend money on a PS5, and they're making sure that they, Sony, are going to make the most money possible by cheapening the overall cost of producing this console. I'm definitely going to pick one of these up just to do a quick unboxing and comparison and review of the console. I would guess that this thing's coming out either at the end of September, and if it doesn't then it'll come out in November, just mainly because we have a special edition current PS5 coming out with Spider-Man 2, and that one was shown off at Comic-Con, and you could even order plates for the current PS5 that are tied into Spider-Man 2, so they're really marketing the hell out of that thing right now, and it's actually still in stock. So if they want to make sure that thing is still picked up, they're not going to introduce the latest and greatest console before it actually releases. So yeah, I think November at the latest is when this thing will release. I'd love to be wrong though. I'd love to have a showcase coming up soon where we get to see this thing. But yeah, all my bets are on the PS5 Pro really making a big sales wave because Sony just did their earnings call. They said that they're not really satisfied with the PS5 sales, mainly because they haven't reached the high end of their expectations. Like, it's doing well, just not well enough for them. And even if people don't know that the PS5 Pro has leaked, they're probably assuming at this point, because the PS5 has been out so long, that the PS5 Pro is coming out next year, so they may be waiting, right? And also, there just aren't enough games on the PlayStation 5 to really justify going out and spending money on it, unless you're a hardcore gamer like us, right? Like, if you want to have the best experience possible, playing stuff like Horizon Forbidden West, God of War Ragnarok, Jedi Survivor, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, Final Fantasy 16, Remnant 2, yeah, you're the kind of person who's going to go out and buy a PlayStation 5. But if you're the kind of person who's waiting for games to get cheaper, you know, you don't really care so much about having the latest and greatest, there really hasn't been much incentive to upgrade to the PlayStation 5 because your PS4 or PS4 Pro runs most of the games that are available on next gen. Like, really at this point, it's just Dead Space and a couple others that you can't play on the PS4 and PS4 Pro, and I think that's the biggest contributing factor as to why Sony's a little bit disappointed with their PS5 sales. So yeah, next year I think we'll see the PS5 Pro, and after that thing comes out, we'll start seeing games more focused on running at 1440p or 4K at 60 FPS. But until then, I think performance mode is going to mean higher resolution but still 30 FPS, as evidenced by this new news about Lords of the Fallen that said that either way you're going to be playing at 30 FPS. If you want to play in quality mode, you're going to be at 1440p, and if you want to be in performance mode, you're going to be at 1080p, which honestly kind of scares me about this game, because you would think that they would just have one mode. If both are targeting 30 FPS, why not consolidate it and just have the 1440p quality mode? All that tells me is that the quality mode has some frame drops, and that's why they're including the 1080p mode as well, and I think that's what we're going to continue to see with a lot of games. Next up here, I wanted to talk about the PSVR 2 for a second, because I follow a lot of PlayStation creators on Twitter, and I saw quite a few people over the weekend talking about this on Twitter, where they basically said either they picked up a PSVR 2 at launch and they're disappointed with it because there just hasn't been a good game output on it, so it's collecting dust, or they haven't picked one up yet, and the biggest reason for that is that there just aren't a lot of games on it. And that kind of got me thinking on whether or not it's time for Sony to just kind of give up on VR. The PSVR 1 came out with the PS4, and people seemed to really like it when it came out, but it was really quickly eclipsed by other VR headsets, mainly because the screen resolution was super low, and the reasoning for that, of course, was because Sony wanted to get it into an affordable price point. But regardless, no matter what, it was like buying another PS4 to use with your PS4, and nothing really changed there with the PS5, right? Like, we saw the exorbitant price of the PS5's PSVR 2. It's around $550 or $600, and it hasn't really gotten any significant price cuts yet. And when you look at the games that they bundled with it at launch, you were getting stuff like Horizon Call of the Mountain, and as cool as Horizon is, I don't think that game or franchise at this point is a system seller big enough to get people to buy a PSVR 2. We did have Resident Evil Village at launch, but still, as much as I'd love Resident Evil to be this massive like system selling franchise, I also don't think that's a game that's really going to get people to pick up a PSVR 2, because all it did was really just piss off PC users, because there's no reason why that game couldn't run on PC VR headsets. So it's not like they're going to go out and buy a PS5 and PSVR 2 just to play the latest Resident Evil game in VR. They don't have games like Half-Life Alyx. I'm pretty sure they don't have Boneworks or Bone Lab. There's a lot more games on PC than there are on PSVR 2. So despite the fact that the headset itself is absolutely phenomenal, like the screens in it are incredible, they do a good job blocking out the light, it doesn't feel too heavy when it's sitting on your head for a while, the controllers, the sense controllers, they work really well, they adapt a lot of the features of the DualSense, like adaptive triggers and haptic feedback into them. Like, there are so many positives I can throw at the actual hardware, but the biggest issue is very similar to one that the Xbox Series X is having majorly, and one that the the PS5 is having minorly, there just aren't enough games on it to make people really want to go out and support this hardware. And even if there were, right, I don't think it would really matter all that much, because realistically what you would want to see from Sony's perspective is more people picking this thing up at launch than they had with the PSVR 1. But it doesn't seem like that happened, and it doesn't seem like sales are picking up anytime soon. So I think the real strategy here that Sony should use is to not necessarily get rid of VR as a whole, but maybe do what they did with the Vita and scale back on first party development of games for now, and just let third parties have their kind of little indie or small niche scene on the PSVR 2, because with headsets like this that have PS5 capability and an easy storefront to access, there are going to be always a group of people who are spending money on the PlayStation Store. And if they can kind of nail down on the development side how many people actually have PSVR 2s and the attach rate on that headset itself, they can kind of scale the budget of their games accordingly and still end up making a lot of money on VR games, like developers did with the Vita after Sony kind of abandoned that thing after around 2 or 3 years. So yeah, I don't think they should give up on VR completely, like just cancel everything and say, yep, we're going to give everyone a refund. But I don't think we really ever need to see a PSVR 3 at this point. The hype is just not there, and it seems like even the companies that supported VR the most, like Meta and Valve with the Valve Index, everyone's kind of pulling back on VR. And we've heard rumors that we're going to see a new Valve VR headset that's sort of like the Oculus Quest 2, where it won't need a PC to play games. That's never really come to fruition. So yeah, I don't think VR is really turning out to be the future that everyone sort of sold it as when the Oculus Rift came out back in the day. And that really sucks, because Sony put a lot of R&D into the hardware, and they also put a lot of R&D into the software. And to see that not really work out, it's never fun. And the last news story I have for you guys today is about From Software's next game, Armored Core 6. Review codes are out, people have them. I unfortunately don't. I would really like to be playing this game though, because an action mech game from Software really seems like a cool thing that's right up my alley. But regardless, because games are ballooning in size and the PS5 only has a little over 600 gigabytes of usable space, people kind of wonder these days when a new game is coming out how much space they're going to need on their console. And I usually use that as an opportunity to tell you links are in the description for SSDs, but with Armored Core 6, I'm kind of excited to say that I actually don't have to tell you to buy a new SSD for this game. So yeah, the file size for Armored Core 6 is a little over 40 gigs, which honestly brings me back to the PS4 days when you could just install a few games on your console and not have to worry about filling up the storage. Now, as far as if this means the game won't be as long as something like Elden Ring, I don't think it's going to be as long as Elden Ring, but from what I've heard, if you want to be a completionist in this game, you're going to have to spend 40 or 50 hours in it. And honestly, for a single player game like this, I'm fine with it being shorter than something like Elden Ring. This year has been crazy with the amount of incredible games that have come out, whether you're talking Baldur's Gate 3, Dead Space, Resident Evil 4, the list goes on and on and on. It's really hard to keep up when these games are like 100-hour epic quests. So having them do an interstitial game between Elden Ring and its DLC, or whatever Soulsborne game comes next, I think that's really cool that it's going to be a little bit shorter of an experience, but still make you feel like you're getting your money's worth. And then also the other game that's coming out this week that you shouldn't need a lot of space for is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And when you write this game out on Twitter and in Google, you spell chainsaw, chain space saw. I know in real life, like if you were going to Ace Hardware to buy a chainsaw, chainsaw is one word, but in the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, chainsaw was 2 words, and this game is very heavily inspired by the first movie, so they're going with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And if you're worried about this game having the same problem as Friday the 13th, which if you don't know and want to know, I have a whole bunch of videos about it over on my personal channel, which is called Jimmy Champagne. The reason this game won't have the same issue is because there's no massive lawsuit going on. One guy owns all of the film IP rights to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre's first movie. His name's Kim Henkel, and he met up with Gun Media and was like, you guys sound great, I want to make a game. Sounds like you guys want to make a game. There's not going to be any lawsuits between 2 creators in the way, because if you didn't know, the reason Friday the 13th had to be canceled is because the guy who made the original Friday the 13th script, Victor Miller, sued the people who own the Friday the 13th IP, saying he deserved royalties for the sequel, and they were obviously saying no because they didn't want to give him any money. It worked out where he won, so the rights got split 50-50, so the game can't really come back, and they're actually going to just work on a new game. But Texas Chainsaw Massacre, that is only with one person, and from what I'm seeing, the game looks pretty good. It's going to be on Game Pass day 1, so if you have a PC or Xbox, it looks like you're going to be able to play it for free there. I'll be picking this game up on PS5 just because I want a physical copy of it. So yeah, I'm hoping that I also get an early key for this game because I'm excited to check it out, and if that happens, I will definitely have some coverage in the weekend video this weekend. Anyway guys, that's all I've got for you today. Make sure you let me know what you think down in the comments below, and remember to subscribe and set your notifications to all if you haven't already. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and shape on.